All right, we're here with an update in regard to our cell tower in Shattown in Pittsfield. Courtney Gilardi is here. Many of our viewers, of course, know how hard she has fought along with the neighbors in regard to this cell tower. And we also have Dafna Tachover, who is, wow, she's accomplished quite a bit in regard to this particular issue. She's an attorney, an expert on the issue of 5G and wireless harms. Until October this year, she was the director of the 5G and Wireless Harms Project of the Children's Health Defense, a nonprofit organization chaired by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s organization. And also, she's the founder of We Are the Evidence, an advocacy organization for the protection of the rights of the many adults and children who have been injured by wireless technology radiation. She's an attorney in New York and Israel, and also has a technology background from her service as a telecommunication and computers officer in the Israeli Defense Forces. So definitely quite a resume, and so welcome. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure, and thank you for taking the time to address this issue.
And specifically, I wanted to start with your involvement in the landmark decision later last year, I guess you could say, I think it was August of last year, in regard to the FCC regulations for cell towers and these frequencies. It was a really significant decision by the judge, really saying that the FCC regulations that are on the books right now really are completely inadequate.
Right. I just want to add, this is a decision of the DC Court of Appeals, which is a federal appellate court, which considered probably one of the best courts in the country, and just a step below, the Supreme Court. So this is not just a decision; it's a major court's decision. It was a 3-judge decision. And I think this is a landmark decision because what it shows is, well, the public is being told for the past 20 years that this technology is safe, that the FCC and FDA are taking measure to protect the health and safety of the public, and they conclude that there's no evidence that this technology is harmful. That essentially that statement that they have been telling the public repeatedly is false, that they did not do their job in conducting an actual evaluation of the studies and the science on this issue, while there is massive amount of evidence that's showing harm from this technology, whether cell towers, cell phones, Wi-Fi, and any other wireless devices. So it's a major decision. I think this is probably this case is as close as you can get to showing fraud on the part of the government.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, and we've had this conversation before on this program with experts talking about those real issues, those real health consequences of these frequencies being put out, and especially for individuals who are near these towers, as we talked about this neighborhood in Pittsfield. And of course, they're not the only neighborhood that's dealing with this issue. So with that, we talk about the legal side of things. Right now, that seems to be a significant legal shift, Dafna. So how can that help in this issue, not only in Pittsfield, but I believe elsewhere, as it relates to setbacks and making sure that we're doing a lot more to recognize that these frequencies are a danger to people, and we need to take proper precautions.
I think the best place to start my answer to your question is to explain what the effects of this decision. So as a result of this decision, while the FCC guidelines, health guidelines, or alleged health guidelines are still in effect, they cannot anymore be used as assurance of safety. So let's say your cell towers in Pittsfield, if you measure the radiation, it might comply with the FCC guidelines, but Verizon or your state or your municipality cannot tell you that because this tower comply with the FCC guideline, that means that it's safe, because that is what we showed, that the FCC did not conduct a proper review of the science to make that determination. And not just that, in the court's decision, actually, I recommend anyone and everyone who can to go online and listen to the hearing. You will hear judges being pissed off at the FCC, and not just pissed off, being shocked by how the FCC made this determination that there's no need to review its health guidelines. And there's a very interesting exchange between Judge Millett and the FCC attorney in regard to the FCC guidelines and the exposure to all of these new technologies. The judge has been shocked because she's been saying, I mean, your guidelines address exposure to one source of radiation for short term, for about 30 minutes long, while all of us are now being exposed to a radiation from numerous number of sources in our home and outside our home. And the FCC guidelines do not address that exposure. They do not address the lengths of exposure, the different frequencies used for this exposure, which affects our nervous system and other system. So the FCC guidelines are completely irrelevant. And not just that, we provided the court with 11,000 pages of evidence, and that is just and only the you know, it's just a small part, a very small part of that, of the science that exists on this issue. And a lot of that science address health effects, adverse health effects, especially neurological effects of cell towers. We provided numerous studies to the court, and not all the studies that exist. And the court in its decision specifically said that the FCC failed to address evidence of neurological effects from exposure to this radiation, exactly the time of neurological effects that now experienced by the people in Pittsfield and in endless amount of places around the country. And just to show the extent of the injury from this, we filed another case against the FCC. It's called the Orchard Rule, which is a rule adopted by the FCC amendment to an existing rule that which allow installation of base station antennas in homes without applications, permit, notice to neighbors or anything. So we challenged that FCC decision. And one of the things we wanted to do, we wanted to show the court how many people are actually injured. We filed a letter with the FCC, and then we conducted an online campaign only on social media for less than a month. We asked people to join our letter to the FCC, to say to the FCC, do not adopt this rule. Within less than a month, we got 15,000 people to join that letter, out of which 6,231 of them said that they and or their children have been injured by this technology. Wow. And most of them are from cell towers and even from people who already been injured by 5G antennas that has been deployed near their homes. So the amount, the sickness is overwhelming. Many people are sick and do not even know that their symptoms are caused by it. If you think about it, think how many of the people you know suddenly have sleep disturbances. They cannot sleep. They have ringing in their ear. Their children suffer cognitive problem, ADHD, anxiety attack. I mean, they have children with anxiety attack. Children under the age of 5 is anxiety attacks, and in reality, this is not anxiety attack. These are the symptoms caused by radiation. This is literally physiological reaction to this exposure. So this epidemic of sickness, which has been silenced because the government has been lying to people. People even don't know that this radiation causes it. But it's also, you know, people are ignorant of this and cannot even know that this is really the source of their problems.
Right, especially when they're being sort of gaslit by the industry and by even local officials in many cases, and local community members also, who are playing quote unquote devil's advocates, saying that, well, geez, this is, you know, sort of phantom sickness, or you're, you know, being hypochondriacs because this this tower was turned on. And we've talked about this and tried to debunk it. 11,000 pages of evidence that was brought in this particular case. When you look at this conversation that we have quite a bit, and you hear people say, follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. Well, guess what? The science is clearly on the side of providing more safety, and there is clearly an impact on human beings from these frequencies, 4G, 5G, and so you know, I think that you know, looking at that, you know, Courtney, coming into Pittsfield, you know, you have heard quite a bit from, or in some cases, not a lot, from city officials, and much of this has been in line with what the industry narrative is, and the industry narrative and the FCC regulations has been, well, there are no safety issues. So that's completely debunked. So any city official or any Board of Health member or any mayor who's saying, well, the FCC regulations say this and it's safe, that has been completely debunked. And you're on mute, Courtney. Get on mute. There you go.
Thank you, John, for having us. I really appreciate it. And I think it's wonderful to hear from the experts as you have Dr. Paul Haru and Frank Clegg, Dr. Kent Chamberlain and Dafna Tachover, obviously, being one of the petitioners in that historic landmark case, to hear it directly from the people who are involved in these issues. And for Dafna to have her organization, We Are the Evidence, so many telecom executives, when they come into a town to site a tower, will say, there's no harm, these people don't exist. And how many meetings have I been asked to speak at on behalf of communities who have an installation that will go in right next door to them and they're concerned. And when it comes time for people who have been injured to speak up, we are all of a sudden dropped off those calls, and so it's like we are treated as if we are invisible and that we do not exist, and that our Board of Health didn't know how to deal with this issue, and our Massachusetts Department of Public Health didn't know how to deal with this issue. And so what we're asking is somebody needs to deal with this issue, because we are not the only one. When this happened to us in Pittsfield, we thought our story was unique. And unfortunately, what we learned was that we were not unique, that people were being harmed by cell towers and wireless radiation and having to leave their homes or having to stay and be sick. And really, with this densification of radio frequency radiation, as these towers become more and more and more, it's our neighborhood today, it will be your neighborhood tomorrow, unless we really create these stronger wireless zoning bylaws, which we have the municipal control to be able to do, and that we start to have these conversations.
And there is a big, and as far as the numbers go, to Courtney's point, an increase in the number of antennas in the United States, increasing from something like 300,000 to 800,000 in the next, couple of years or so. Daphne, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, sorry to interrupt. I mean, actually, the number is there are 300. There were before the deployment of 5G, there were 300,000 cell towers. For the deployment of 5G and to do what government wanted to do with 5G, essentially the government said that within a short few years, they're going to add 800,000 cell towers. And I don't know the exact percentage now or exact numbers, but I can tell you that large percentage of that additional 800,000 towers have been deployed. And I've been contacted, just like Courtney said before, daily by people who have been injured from the new alleged small towers, let alone the big towers like the one you have in Pittsburgh. And I can tell you that whole families are becoming sick within less than a month after those antennas are being installed in front of their homes. And the stories are just heartbreaking. Full families just getting sick. And then they cannot leave their houses because, we made quite a lot of noise about the harms of these antennas, and nobody wants to buy the house, and they're literally forced to stay in their home and have nowhere to go. They cannot get out of the house. They spend tens of thousands of dollars trying to shield themselves from the radiation. And if they don't, they literally are sick. Another point I wanted to make, I think a very relevant example and proof that the government know about the harms is what happened with the diplomats. You may have heard about the diplomat sickness in Havana and in China, what's called the Havana syndrome. And it's diplomats who started to develop exactly the same symptoms that now experienced by people who are exposed to cell tower and get sick, headaches, heart palpitations, sleep disturbances, cognitive problems, ringing in the ear, brain fogs, et cetera, et cetera. And for a long time, they have been ignored by the government. And until a scientist by the name of Dr. Beatrice Gom brought an amazing study showing that without a doubt, the cause for the symptoms of this diplomats is exposure to RF radiation, pulse and modulated RF radiation. Those diplomats were able to get a program done by 60 Minutes. And after that program, some congressmen became interested, and there was a lot of pressure of the Department of Defense to do something about it. Now, have no doubt the Department of Defense does know that this radiation is harmful. And part of the document we filed with the court in our case against the FCC are government studies and reports showing clear evidence that this radiation is harmful, including papers by the Navy, papers by NASA, papers by the Air Force. For example, there's an amazing report by the Air Force, and the conclusion, there's ample evidence of harm, profound harms from this radiation. But your government tell you that there's no problem, and those ignorant city council members tell you that there's no evidence, it's nothing, and these people that are hypochondriac. It's just ridiculous. Back to the diplomats. Eventually, the Department of Defense appointed the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a study and tell them whether or not, or not, more correctly, ask them to find what is the cause of this diplomat's sickness. They did publish a report in October 2021 saying that the likely cause of these symptoms are RF exposure. And it's the same exposure of cell tower, pulse and modulated radio frequencies radiation. There is no difference between the sickness of these diplomats and the sickness of the people in Pittsfield, and what numerous and probably large percent of the population already suffering all around the country. So now there's also an admission of the government that this radiation is causing the symptoms. So I suggest that any council member who finds themselves an expert become a little bit more humble, go and read the government reports about the massive evidence that RF exposure can cause exactly those symptoms that their residents are complaining about. And it's outrageous that they don't do anything about it, or try to present themselves as experts who know what they're talking about, and this essentially repeating slogan put by the industry without having any idea what they're talking about.
And when it comes down to the government and its understanding that there are issues going on with this radiation, it wasn't just a few weeks ago, that the federal government, the FAA, said, hey, we can't have this 5G rollout, not because it's not safe for human beings, but because ultimately human beings,
Yes.
but their aircraft is endangered by these frequencies and the radiation being put out. So they delayed the 5G rollout, and then also, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dafna, they had it so towers near airports would not be turned on with the 5G. So tell me about that a little bit. To me, what a wild sort of hypocrisy there.
Well, I think what happens with this 5G deployment, I think first, a lot of people need to know that 5G is really not a technology. It's an infrastructure that intends to connect devices instead of humans. And this is really a redundant deployment of no purpose except extracting data and leading us to places that we don't really want to go, where everything you do, anything in your house that you do is being recorded, kept, and used for various purposes, a lot of them purposes that you would not want that data to be used for. So what happened with this recent 5G deployment, after the first deployment of 5G, where a lot of it was using millimeter waves, was pretty much unsuccessful. All of these companies decided to change route and now deploy lower frequencies that travel farther. Maybe that will finally get them speeds they promised to the public. So those companies a year ago bought those relevant frequencies, paid $81 billion for this infrastructure. So clearly they're heavily invested in that infrastructure and do not want anything to interfere with that deployment. There was, just like everything that was done with this technology, the first do and then think. And even if they think and find out that there is a problem, unfortunately, there are no solution, and the public loses, just like what happened with the airplane. So what happened with this deployment? They discovered that the same frequencies that are now used for the new 5G, which is a C-band called 5G, are the same frequencies used by several a system in airplane, and most importantly, by the altimeter, which is a system in airplane that they use especially when they're landing to determine the distance from the ground. So this is a critical system. So if 5G antennas are going to be put near those airports, they're going to interfere with those systems. If you have two antennas that are transmitted in the same frequency, there is interference. So 5G antennas transmit those frequencies, the altimeter transmits those frequencies, there are going to be problems. So clearly that is a critical problem. And the January 4th deployment was supposed to take place on January 4th, so the launch of this new systems, and they have been delayed until January 19th. There was some kind of compromise that was offered by the FAA that they would not put those antennas in near 50 airports, not even the main airports. What about the other airports? What about the other airplanes? Eventually,
which ones are the 50? Which ones are the 50 airports that they chose?
I have no idea what the criteria, but for example, the Denver airport, which is a huge hub, was not one of those airports.
Wow.
So a lot of the flights were delayed, canceled, because this is a critical. I mean, I would never go on a flight where this doesn't work, and I'm sure the pilots as well. Later on, the FAA said that they actually 78% of the airplanes are actually okay to fly despite the 5G antenna. Only 22% of those airplanes have a problem with this. Only 22% of the flights in the United States and international flights. So those flights have been canceled, delayed, and there are different issues with them. And the thing is, essentially, the telecom companies won. So because you need 5G infrastructure to reduce your download speed of your stupid games and movies from 10 seconds to 2 seconds, we now have serious security problem with our airplanes that affect every part of our economy, our ability to travel, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a problem when telecom won, when clearly they should not win, and that just shows the power of the telecom companies. But as you said before, it's really most outrageous that we give so much attention to all this interruption between airplanes and antennas and system, but we completely ignore the fact that same antennas also interfere with the human body, not just like with our system as airplane, and nobody is doing anything about it. And I think if our industry would have the same power of the lobbying power of those airlines, we would have been much more successful. But you have a big problem when basically it's all about money. The telecom industry has about 463 lobbyists in Congress. They put about $1 billion a year in lobbying money. We do not have even one person in lobby I spend a lot of time in Congress trying to lobby, but without an open checkbook, you get nowhere in Congress.
Yeah.
And so it's a problem.
And you're not being paid as a lobbyist in any way, shape, or form.
I wasn't paid.
And so it's basically David versus Goliath. And
I don't think so. I think it's a tiny Goliath versus an army of it's a tiny David with an army of Goliaths.
That's true too. Yeah.
And it's not only it's not only the it's not only telecom industry. This is now about military. This is about the Cold War with China. They're now putting out all these satellites and starting to create space stations for the military, for missiles deployment, et cetera, et cetera. So you're fighting the people addiction, because most of the population is addicted to technology and they have no idea what it's doing to them. You have a problem with the telecom industry, which is greedy, the government that makes tons of money, military interests, basically government interests, and alleged national security. So there's every interest to continue and perpetuate with lie. Well, I think this is the biggest lie ever told, and I think it's probably the worst thing that ever happened to people. People are sick, and you see sickness all around you, and this is really what explains it.
Yeah, and so now bringing it into Pittsfield, Courtney. So like I said, what you've been hearing is this sort of industry FCC line that it's safe, and if you talk to an attorney who represents Verizon or what have you, they will up and down say that absolutely this is safe, this is craziness, these concerns, et cetera, et cetera. So up until this point, that is what you've heard. And now you have a meeting with the Board of Health on Wednesday. There's been some turnover on the Board of Health. So I think that is a reason for optimism, but it's also an issue where you have to catch people up on this, because this has been a 2-year ordeal, or just about 2-year ordeal, and so there's a lot of catching up to do.
Absolutely. We do have a meeting with the Board of Health on Wednesday, and we're looking forward to that because they had canceled the December Board of Health meeting to prepare going into the second meeting with Verizon. And I think we had known after the first one, there's an industry publication called Inside Towers, and Inside Towers had printed an article on Pittsfield, and it's called Pittsfield Asks Pretty Please. And it was, in the absence of a medical claim or a legal action, Pittsfield Board of Health has taken a new tack to ask pretty please to relocate the tower. And I think, this was probably a good strategy to go in, is to say, hey, listen, this community was blindsided by the cell tower, right? Abutters didn't receive notification. They had no voice and say in the process of the tower siting. They would have been there at the meetings if they had known anything about it. This tower was illegally constructed through an unpermitted access point at the top of Alma Street instead of using the 877 South Street. People didn't know there was 60 acres of land. The Stockbridge tribe of Mohicans didn't want it there, and that held up a NEPA review. When the permit expired, instead of a second public ZBA hearing with notification, it got a stamp of approval. So, I can understand the Board of Health going in and asking, but after that September meeting, we spent time locating, and the community was incredible, finding alternative locations that this tower could be sited that could provide the coverage that Verizon desired in this part of the city. And we expected that the medical claims would be given to Verizon, that the alternative locations would be provided to Verizon, and that the legal cease and desist would be issued to Verizon. And instead, they went into the second meeting and there was no agenda and there was no preparation. And unfortunately, Brad Gordon had been out on a leave of absence, and we had a new chair and we had a new health director. So there was all this turnover, and they were getting caught up from the very beginning. So they went into this meeting with Verizon. And from what I understand, the meeting essentially defended their permit process and said, these people have a fear of new technology. That's what it was, Dafna, that, it wasn't that there's biological harms, that children are vomiting in their beds, that people are experiencing headaches and dizziness and palpitations and ringing in their ears. But essentially it was, if 4G was an issue, which our tower is, we would have people reporting harm, and we don't.
And the reason we don't is because people cannot do that, and that people do not know that following the Telecommunication Act of 1996, there's a section that says that you essentially cannot object to installation of cell towers antennas based on environmental considerations, which means health. And this meant that people, and there's numerous courts decisions that basically said that your right to sue even for damages after you've been injured is preempted. So you cannot bring lawsuit to stop those antennas from being installed, and then you cannot bring lawsuit for suing the damage that was caused to you because of this tower. So this is why people can continue to say, oh, if there was a problem, we would know about it. It's because the people do not know that the reason you don't know about a problem, because we cannot sue for the installation of these cell towers, and this is the reason. While there is massive sickness from this tower, and it just,
a true captured agency. Again, like we talked about before, the industry has captured that agency, and the government, they removed any liability for Verizon or any cell tower or any entity that sends out these frequencies for health issues. There's nothing you can do. Legally. Yeah. And so
as long as those towers comply with the FCC guideline, you have no recourse whatsoever. And then they capitalize it, lie to the public, says no problem. The problem is all over. Everyone is sick. I get dozens of emails a day from people who've been injured from these antennas all over the country. And I'm sure other organizations get as many. It's just outrageous. It's the biggest lie ever told.
And when it comes down to it, but there is hope because cell towers have been moved. And Courtney, we were talking about one in Delaware, and in that case, I believe it was Verizon also. And Verizon, of course, said, no way, we're not moving it. We're not doing a thing, because why would Verizon do that? They would never want to show or have any concern, because that would show sort of liability or what have you. Of course, they're going to say it's safe. Well, they said the same thing there in Delaware. What happened?
Yeah, so what happened was the state decided to go ahead and allocate $375,000 worth of funds to put towards 5 poles to be relocated that had small cells on them without Verizon's permission. So they didn't engage in Verizon. They just said, listen, these towers were placed here. People are objecting, they don't want them. We are sure that they can find an alternative location that would be less objectionable. And so the state and the city worked together. And John, what I loved about this was that they said, listen, we're not assigning blame. We're not, and we're not saying that if they get moved, there's any liability on anyone's behalf. We are just looking for community solutions. And so the state allocated $375,000 to allocate the tower. Then they went to Verizon, and because there was unified support from the city officials and the state representatives, they presented this to Verizon, and Verizon agreed to relocate those 5 towers, which, was absolutely incredible. And we would love to see, our state representative, our mayor here in Pittsfield with that unified support. And we have asked our state representative for $50,000. We know that the total price to build the tower and the road to it was only $100,000. We have that from the original permit. So this is really not a lot of money. They can reuse the tower elsewhere. And so really to relocate it at the high end, we were quoted $50,000. So we have asked $50,000 for the state to, as a goodwill gesture, to relocate that tower, to resite it elsewhere away from a residential area. We were told that with the $40 million plus of ARPA funds, that it would be unlikely that the state would give that money unless we had first went through the ARPA process. We have asked our city council president, we have asked our city if they could go ahead and, free up that money. If it isn't from ARPA, perhaps, we do have several $1 million sitting in free cash that we have been told is used for an emergency. And we've said 17 people here in the neighborhood sick, displaced. I mean, I'm not sleeping in my home. We have other neighbors who aren't as well. It's winter. They can no longer sleep in tents. So they're being either forced to stay in their homes and be sick, or they're doubling up with family members. And this is no way to live at all. I mean, it's absolutely no way to live. So we've asked the city for the financial resources and the political solidarity with us, that support to be able to move these towers. And that's what we see ultimately does get these towers down.
I think if there was a real conversation, and go ahead, make it behind closed doors. That's fine, everybody knows. Okay, all the city councilors, all the board of health, they even the mayor, they know the right thing to do is to pick up and move that tower. They know it. And so the question is there the will, and is there a funding source to get that? We know, I mean, there's over $40 million, and how more appropriate would it be as this tower was kind of put up stealthily right in the middle of the COVID lockdown? It would be appropriate to use some of those COVID dollars to move this. And like you said, no one has to take the blame. Linda Tyer doesn't have to say, I'm sorry. It's okay. You don't have to say you're sorry. Let's just do the right thing. Pick up this tower, move it in a place that engineers have already indicated would be good. Property owners have already indicated that they'd be willing to host it. So let's get this thing done. And so really the question is, so there's this FCC, this landmark decision in US Appeals Court. So then really the question is, what does that mean right now in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and hundreds or even thousands of other communities? But how does this impact the conversation here, this landmark decision, Dafna?
So, I've been hearing both from Pittsfield and from many other cities around the country that when this case is being mentioned, what industries does is trying to tell those municipalities, oh, this is nothing. This is just an administrative decision. It's just an error of the FCC. False, and as false as it can get. So what this decision means, it means that any statement that basically that those antennas are safe, that there's no evidence of harm, that the FCC, they can rely on the FCC determination is clearly false. They actually cannot make such statement considering that court decision. So essentially, this is not an administrative decision. It is an administrative decision, but it's not merely an administrative decision. This is not an error of the FCC. What the court found is that the FCC essentially did not do its job. There is actually no review of the science by the FCC. There is no review of the science by the FDA. Furthermore, the FCC and the FDA know that the massive amount of evidence of harm that they have purposely ignored. And so, this is not an error. This docket where the public put the studies that show that there's massive evidence of harm, where hundreds of people reported harm from the cell towers and from other devices, all of this evidence has purposely, intentionally, and knowingly being ignored by the FCC. And for the court to approve an FCC decision, the FCC actually have to show and address all of this evidence and show why this evidence is not enough to change the health guidelines. So they cannot, it's not an error. It's basically, it's going to be massive efforts to basically dismiss this evidence, something the FCC will never be able to do because the evidence is clear. And that's what this case show. So, and again, all you have to do is read the decision and see for yourself. So this is not an administrative decision. And to correct that administrative decision, the FCC is going to have actually a very hard time to correct that decision because they have to answer the evidence and they cannot really answer the evidence and show why they claim that there's no evidence of harm.
Yeah, so I recommend, the city council in Pittsfield, the Board of Health, the mayor to look at that decision and understand that, the 11,000 pages of evidence of health impacts, the decision that was made by the judges there, that's all real, that's all legit. So what you're hearing from the industry folks is going to be, as an example, when we were looking to ban styrofoam in Pittsfield, well, the styrofoam lobby came to Pittsfield and said, styrofoam's great. It's safe. It's awesome. It's maybe even, it can be even biodegradable, wink, wink, plastic bags, the same thing. They said the same thing. Mosquito spraying, when we're having that conversation, all of a sudden the people who want to do the mosquito spraying say, hey, the EPA says it's safe. Here, look right here, so yeah. Of course they're going to say it's safe. Of course they're going to say it's safe because it's in their best interest. It is their industry. It's how they make money, and it is a captured agency. So just to be 100%, 1,000% clear to all my friends in Pittsfield as we're having this conversation, no, there's overwhelming evidence that it's not safe. And no matter what the industry people say, or even the FCC regulations, which is a captured agency, guess what? The truth is on this side of things.
And by the way, if you want to know what industry really thinks, not what industry is telling your council members, shortly after the hearing we had in court, in which it became clear that the court is going to rule against the FCC, industry became very concerned. In one of the main law journal, there was an article written by telecom industry about what would be the consequences of such a decision basically against the FCC, and how basically what he was saying is that this would be horrendous decision from the industry, that it would put the whole telecommunication industry into turmoil because it means that their basically their technology, there's likelihood of it being determined not to be safe, and so this is really what the industry is thinking. And funny enough, 2 days after that article was published, it was removed from the database of the journal, per the request of the author, meaning per the request of the telecommunication industry. We actually have that article, but again, they're scared. They know that this decision is hugely important, very meaningful,
Yeah.
not an administrative mistake, as your council member
Yeah.
have been telling you.
And money, and unfortunately in that case, money talks, and money can censor, and that's just the reality. And so Courtney, you keep on keeping on. I love this. You know,
Amazing.
I've been in city government and in government for a very long time, and I don't know if I've seen anyone as tenacious and as consistent, and just you don't stop. And I think when you have that, that's really what you need when you're going up against the industry. I mean, you know, we all saw the movie with the Aaron Brockovich movie, right? So you know, that's the reality.
And it's all there, John. You know, like that's the thing is that we wouldn't have gotten this far if it wasn't for the Dafnas of the world, if it wasn't for the Dr. Paul Haroux and Kent Chamberlain, if it wasn't for the New Hampshire Commission report that had a commission of people, and these were scientists, engineers, and industry, medical doctors coming together, and the consensus was that radio frequency radiation from cell towers was a biological hazard, right? That this was a human health and safety issue. And Amelia and I went up to New Hampshire to testify just 2 weeks ago on a 1,640-foot setback for all new towers away from residential areas and a registry of harm. And here in Massachusetts on, I believe it's Tuesday or Wednesday, Senate Bill 186 will be reported out, and that's for Massachusetts to have a commission for wireless harm. There's also another Senate bill for wireless safety in our schools with our kids, because you know we love our public schools, we love our children, we love our teachers. We want to make sure that they're in a healthy environment as well. And we know that the children in these environments for 7 or 8 hours a day with industrial routers, it's not like being at home where we have one router and it's far away from them and we can put it on, you know, we can turn it off at night. So it's so important. All the science is there. You know, and we just need the political will and the courage to take action and do the right thing. So we are really hoping on Wednesday, we go into this Board of Health meeting that they're ready to issue Verizon a cease and desist based on the medical claims of this neighborhood. Our doctors have reached out to our mayor since October of 2020. We are now the end of, by the time that, you know, we'll be in February, by the time this Board of Health meeting is in a few days. And so we're really hoping, you know, the community has gotten around behind us. They have found alternative locations. They have raised money for litigation. Unfortunately, that process is very long and has nothing to do with the health effects that's experienced by a cluster here in our neighborhood. We know that the quickest way to get this tower down, as you say, is to have those conversations, to get everybody together in a room and to come up with community-based, where we don't worry about the blame and the backstory. We've got all of that, it's documented, but that we really work on doing the right thing. And so that's what I hope can happen.
It's happened other places. It can happen in Pittsfield. They've picked up a tower. They've moved it somewhere else. It can happen. It doesn't matter if Verizon likes it or not. And honestly, they probably really don't care as long as they're not paying for it, to be honest with you. So when it comes down to it, let's do this. So Courtney, thank you again. Dafna Tachover, it's so great to have met you virtually and heard more about that historic case. And I just think that there's more and more information coming out to the general public, just starting to get into that ether, and to that maybe getting to a point where there's a threshold where enough people are starting to really understand and hear this message that, and the message is the truth, that there are health issues here, and we have to do better to protect people, human beings, so as opposed to industries. So thank you again, ladies, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much,
John, and thank you, Dafna. I really appreciate all you're doing for our community. Thank you.
Likewise, Courtney, and I agree with everything John said about you.
I like you.
You inspire us, Dafna. You take this on at a big level. We take this on at a little level, but we let people know that you know, we're not alone. We're really trying to get rid of the stigma and the shame around people being harmed by wireless radiation. We want people to know that It's happening in every community and it's happening in every country. And these people need protections. EHS, microwave illness, it's an illness that is protected under the American with Disabilities Act. But as Amelia testified in the New Hampshire Senate, we need more than paper protections. We actually need real live we need real live protection, so that if we are afforded the right to be able to stay safely in our homes and we don't consent to the radio frequency radiation that's bombarding us 24/7, 365 days, we should be able to be safe. We're asking for that.
I think most important, we need to ask our elected official to start doing their job. And by the way, General Healy is now running for governor in the state of Massachusetts. I approached her a while back, and I remember she told me, oh, I have this sticker on my cell phone to protect from radiation. Then she asked me, what do you think from it? What do you think about it? So clearly she's concerned about the harm. So maybe she be concerned not about her own use of her cell phone, but the health and safety of the people of the state of Massachusetts. So, this is a call for her to do her job and save the people.
And
Can we
this
just
is
take 1 second just to let you know, Dafna, that there is an open investigation into this cell tower with Attorney General Maura Healey, not just for how the tower was permitted, but actually we've had people write in to the Attorney General on our behalf that this is a consumer protections issue, because the industry is saying that these towers are safe and cannot create harm. And then when people are getting harmed, industry is saying it's a fear of new technology, right? It's just that you don't like something different.
In 1978, there was a hearing in Congress about cigarettes and whether or not they're harmful. And there were 2 doctors testifying on behalf of the industry. And they said this is smokophobia. So this is a very known tactic by industry, like the tobacco industry, like the cell phone industry, basically say, oh, this is hysteric. These are people hysterical. This is psychological. This is a phobia. Well, this is a phobia established in 10,000 studies, clear studies showing clear evidence, including military study, government studies. This is not phobia. This is fraud.
Right. And the common theme often is when people are opposed to something, oh, you're just afraid of change. Well,
Yes.
no,
And progress.
that's very oversimplifying the situation, and it's not your progress is not my progress, and so forth. So this is a great conversation. And in that election year, it is an election year, and Maura Healey is running for governor. So as constituents, as people who are concerned about this, make that an issue, because there are state regulations as well as federal regulations. So let's do it. Let's do it. So Dafna, Courtney, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dafna.